The theater was Ethan Cole's church, a vast, dark space where he came not to pray, but to forget. The heavy red velvet seat beneath him was a familiar anchor, a spot in the very last row where the shadows clung thickest. Down below, on the stage bathed in a pool of golden light, a world of beauty and pain unfolded, and at the center of it all was her. Lila Monroe. A year. It had been a year since the phone call that shattered his world, since his older brother, his best friend, was taken by a sudden, cruel twist of fate. The silence in Ethan's apartment since then was a living thing, a heavy blanket of grief he carried with him everywhere. He went to work, he spoke to people, he functioned, but inside, he was a statue, frozen in a moment of loss. But here, in the hushed darkness of the ballet, the ice around his heart would begin to crack. He never came for the story of the ballet itself, those tales of swans and princes. He came for her story, the one she told with her body. From the first moment he saw Lila dance, it was like watching his own soul reflected back at him. When she leaped, it was the burst of joy he remembered from childhood summers with his brother. When she moved slowly, her arms carving shapes in the air, it was the quiet, aching sadness he felt every morning. And when she spun, a dizzying blur of motion and control, it was the frantic, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, the pain wouldn't last forever. She didn't know him, they had never met, yet night after night, she danced his pain, his hope, his silent scream for rebirth. Her grace was a lifeline he clung to in the dark. Lila, for her part, had felt his presence. A dancer is aware of the audience, a sea of faces, but one face can become a constant. In the middle of a difficult sequence, as she balanced on the very tip of her toe, her eyes would flicker for a split second to the very back of the hall. He was always there. The man in the shadows. He never clapped too loudly, never stood for a standing ovation. He just watched. He was handsome, with a sad, thoughtful face that seemed out of place in a crowd of cheering people. At first, it was a little strange, but soon it became a comfort. He was her constant, a silent witness to her art. She started dancing for him, pouring an extra ounce of her soul into her performance, wondering if he could feel it. Tonight was the final performance of the season. The air backstage was thick with hairspray, rosin, and nervous energy. Lila stood in the wings, her costume a cloud of white tulle, taking deep, calming breaths. For some reason, tonight felt different. More important. She peeked through the curtain, her eyes finding his silhouette in the back row. A strange sense of determination settled over her. She would make him feel something tonight. She would dance so truthfully that he would have to understand the message she was sending into the darkness. Out in the hall, Ethan felt the shift. From her very first entrance, Lila's dancing was different. It was more powerful, more raw. Every extension of her leg, every arch of her back, was filled with her emotion so potent it stole the air from his lungs. When the music swelled, and she ran across the stage, it felt like she was running towards him. When she collapsed in a scene of sorrow, he felt his own chest tighten with a familiar ache. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing he had ever seen. For 2 hours, he forgot about the empty apartment, the silent phone, the crushing weight of his grief. There was only her, a beacon of light in his endless night. The final curtain fell. The thunder of applause was like a wave crashing over him, pulling him back to reality. People around him rose to their feet, cheering, but Ethan remained seated, paralyzed by the return of the real world. He waited as the crowd filed out, their happy chatter fading away, until he was completely alone in the vast, empty hall. The ushers had begun cleaning, the house lights were up, and the magic was gone. He let out a long, slow breath, the weight settling back onto his shoulders, heavier than before. It was then he heard it. A low, deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the old theater. A moment later, the sky outside the tall windows lit up with a flash of lightning, followed by an ear-splitting crack of thunder. The storm had been forecast, but no one expected it to be this violent, this sudden. The lights in the theater flickered dangerously. Through the windows, he could see the rain, a solid sheet of water pounding against the glass. He was trapped. Lila, meanwhile, was in her dressing room, carefully wiping off her stage makeup. The adrenaline was still coursing through her veins. She had danced well, she knew it. She felt alive, electric. She changed out of her costume and into comfortable clothes, but something pulled her back towards the stage. She wanted to see the empty hall one last time, to soak in the quiet after the storm of applause. She walked out from the wings, still in her ballet slippers, the stage floor cool beneath her feet. And then she saw him. He hadn't left. He was still there, in the same seat, his figure looking small and lonely in the vast, empty sea of red velvet. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. This was her chance. The mystery was sitting right there. Without allowing herself to think, without a plan, she walked down the steps from the stage and started up the long center aisle. Her footsteps were silent on the thick carpet. Ethan was lost in thought, watching the storm rage outside, so he didn't hear her approach. It was a soft scent of flowers and sweat, the unique scent of a dancer after a performance, that made him turn. And there she was. Lila Monroe. Standing in the aisle just a few feet from him. Up close, she was even more beautiful. Her hair was damp from being pinned up, her face clean of makeup, and her eyes, a startling shade of green, were fixed on him. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The only sounds were the frantic drumming of the rain on the roof and the low growl of the thunder. The air between them felt charged, like the storm outside had leaked into the room. It was awkward and electric all at once. Lila's courage almost failed her. What was she doing? But she had come this far. She took a small, shaky breath. "You always watch me," she said, her voice softer than he imagined, but clear in the silent hall. "Why?" The question hung in the air. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a star ballerina, but a girl who was just as brave and just as vulnerable as her dancing suggested. He saw the curiosity in her eyes, and the slight nervousness. He knew he owed her the truth, the only piece of it he could give. He gave her a small, sad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Because you're dancing," he said, his own voice rough with emotion, "it feels like you're telling my story." The silence that followed his confession was not empty, it was full. It was filled with the pounding rhythm of the rain, the frantic beating of two hearts, and the unspoken understanding that something significant had just shifted in the universe. Lila did not step back or look away. She simply absorbed his words, her head tilted slightly as if listening to a faint, beautiful piece of music only she could hear. She saw the raw honesty in his eyes, the pain he usually hid in the shadows, now laid bare for her alone. "It's a heavy story," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement, a gentle acceptance of the weight he carried. Ethan simply nodded, his throat too tight to form more words. He felt a strange sense of relief, as if a valve had been opened, releasing a pressure he had grown so accustomed to he no longer noticed it. This woman, this dancer he had watched from a distance for so long, was now seeing him, the real him, and she hadn't flinched. The theater manager appeared then, breaking the spell with the jangle of his keys and a gruff announcement that the power was being shut down in sections and everyone needed to move to the lobby. The moment was over, but the connection had been forged. They walked side by side through the darkening backstage corridors, a world of ropes and sandbags and painted scenery that felt strangely intimate. In the bustling lobby, filled with stranded patrons, they found a quiet corner on a worn velvet bench. They talked. At first, it was about the storm, about the performance, safe and simple topics. But soon, the conversation deepened, flowing as naturally as a river finding its course. He learned her name was Lila Monroe. She learned his was Ethan Cole. They spoke of small things, her love for hot chocolate with too much whipped cream, his inexplicable talent for knowing what time it was without a clock. They avoided the heavy truths for a while, building a bridge of lighter moments. He made her laugh with a story about a disastrous cooking attempt, a sound that was even more beautiful to him than any symphony. She watched his face transform when he smiled, the sadness momentarily chased away, and she felt a surge of triumph. When the storm finally eased to a gentle drizzle, Ethan found the courage he didn't know he possessed. "Can I see you again?" he asked, his voice low. "Maybe for coffee? Somewhere with lights and less drama." Lila's smile was immediate and radiant. "I'd like that," she said, and the simple words felt like a promise. Their first official meeting was at a small, sun-drenched cafe a few days later. The awkwardness was there, a faint echo of their first encounter, but it was quickly melted away by a shared and growing curiosity. They spent 2 hours talking, the coffee in their cups growing cold and forgotten. It was during their third meeting, a walk through the city park as the autumn leaves drifted around them, that Ethan told her about his brother. He started from the beginning, from the childhood adventures, the unwavering friendship, the way his brother had always been his anchor. And then, he told her about the car accident, the phone call, the suffocating grief that had followed. He spoke haltingly, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, unable to look at her. Lila listened. She didn't offer empty words of comfort or try to fix his pain. She simply walked beside him, her presence a quiet, steady support. When his voice finally faded, she gently slipped her hand into his. Her fingers were cool and slender, but their grip was strong. The contact was a jolt, a warm, living current that passed between them. It was the first time they had truly touched, and it felt more intimate than any embrace. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, then up at her, and in her eyes, he saw not pity, but a profound and understanding empathy. For the first time since the funeral, he did not feel alone in his grief. In return, Lila shared her own world with him. She spoke of the blisters and the bruised toenails, the aching muscles and the relentless discipline. She told him about the fear that lived in the heart of every dancer, the fear of injury, of being not good enough, of a career that could end in a single misstep. She confessed her biggest dream, a secret she held close, to dance on the stage of the Paris Opera Ballet, to be considered among the greats. Ethan listened, captivated. He saw the fierce dedication in her, the fire that fueled her grace, and his admiration for her grew into something deeper, something warmer. Their meetings became the brightest part of their weeks. They were a series of quiet, perfect moments that felt stolen from a dream. An afternoon spent in a dusty old bookstore, pointing out their favorite novels to each other. A shared slice of cherry pie at a late-night diner, talking until the waitress started wiping down the surrounding tables. A spontaneous drive to the coast to watch the sunset, sitting on the hood of his car in comfortable silence, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. With every laugh, every shared glance, every accidental brush of arms, the invisible thread pulling them together grew stronger and more resilient. The first kiss happened on her doorstep. He had walked her home after a simple dinner, the night air crisp and clear. A street lamp cast a soft, golden glow around them, creating a private world on the sidewalk. They stood close, neither wanting the evening to end. The conversation had lulled, replaced by a tense, sweet anticipation. Ethan reached up and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Lila leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief second. That was all the permission he needed. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway. The kiss was not rushed or frantic. It was a slow, tender exploration, a silent conversation all its own. It tasted of hope and understanding and a shared, burgeoning love. It was soft and lingering, a promise of everything that was yet to come. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. No words were needed. The world felt new, and the future, for the first time in a very long time for both of them, seemed not something to be feared, but something to be eagerly, joyfully embraced. He walked home that night with the ghost of her lips on his and the feeling that the heavy, grey world he had been living in was now bursting with color. The golden days that followed their first kiss were the sweetest either of them had ever known. For Ethan, the world, which had for so long been painted in shades of grey, was now brilliantly, vibrantly colorful. The memory of Lila's lips on his was a constant, warm presence, a talisman against the old, creeping shadows of his grief. He found himself humming, smiling for no reason, the weight on his shoulders feeling miraculously lighter. Their time together was a series of stolen, perfect moments. He would wait for her outside the rehearsal studio, watching as she emerged, tired but radiant, and the way her face lit up when she saw him never failed to make his heart stutter. They explored the city hand in hand, two parts of a whole that had finally found each other. He loved watching her in the simple, everyday moments, the way she concentrated when choosing a pastry, the sound of her laugh echoing in a quiet museum, the way she would rest her head on his shoulder during a late-night movie. In her presence, the ghost of his brother became less a source of piercing pain and more a bittersweet memory he could finally begin to cherish without breaking. For Lila, Ethan was her anchor in the tumultuous, demanding sea of her career. His quiet, steady belief in her was a force more powerful than any standing ovation. When she doubted herself, he was there with a few, simple words that rebuilt her confidence. He didn't just love the ballerina on the stage, he loved the woman who was stubborn, who got frustrated when she couldn't master a step, who loved silly romantic comedies, and whose favorite food was greasy pizza after a long day. With him, she didn't have to be perfect. She could just be Lila. She shared with him her deepest insecurities about the upcoming audition for the Paris company, a secret she had told almost no one. He listened, held her, and told her that no matter what happened, she was the most extraordinary person he had ever known. Their love felt like a safe harbor, a beautiful, private world they had built together, and for a glorious, fleeting time, it seemed utterly unshakable. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. It was thick, expensive, and bore a distinctive French postmark. Lila's hands trembled as she held it, her name typed elegantly across the front. This was it. The answer to a lifetime of work, of sacrifice, of dreaming. She called Ethan, her voice a mixture of wild excitement and sheer terror, and asked him to come over. She needed to open it with him there. When he arrived, she was pacing her small living room, the unopened envelope lying on the coffee table like a sleeping dragon. He took her hands, stilling them, and kissed her forehead. "Whatever it says," he whispered, "it doesn't change you. It doesn't change us." With a deep, shaky breath, she slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the letter. She got in. The Paris Opera Ballet. Not just an audition, but a full company contract, a 2-year position starting in the new season. It was everything she had ever worked for, the pinnacle of a dancer's dream. A scream of pure, unadulterated joy escaped her, and she threw her arms around Ethan's neck, spinning around the room. "I did it. Ethan, I did it." He held her tightly, laughing with her, feeling her joy as if it were his own. And in that first, brilliant flash of celebration, it was. But as the initial shockwave of happiness began to recede, a cold, quiet reality started to seep into the room, settling between them like a fine mist. The conversation began later that evening, over a bottle of champagne that now tasted faintly of anxiety. "It's 2 years, Lila said, her voice tentative, her eyes searching his. "But, we can visit. It'll fly by. And you could come with me?" The question hung in the air, hopeful and fragile. Ethan felt a familiar, icy dread grip his heart. Paris. Thousands of miles away. A new life, a world of glamour and pressure where he would be an outsider. The old fears, the ones Lila had almost banished, came roaring back. The fear of being left behind. The fear of loss. The memory of another goodbye that had been forever. He looked at her, at the desperate hope in her eyes, and the words he knew she needed to hear. "I'll wait for you, I'll come with you." Stuck in his throat, choked by the ghost of his past. "Lila, it's a huge move. My job, my life is here," he said, his voice strained. "And that world, I wouldn't belong there." The light in her eyes dimmed. This wasn't the reaction she had dreamed of. She had imagined him sweeping her into his arms and promising her the world, not building walls. "So, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice small. "That you wouldn't even try?" The discussion spiraled from there, fueled by fear and misunderstanding. He, terrified of losing her to the vast distance and a new life, became distant and withdrawn, his silence a poor substitute for the reassurance she craved. She, heartbroken that he wasn't as willing to fight for them as she was, interpreted his fear as a lack of commitment. They began to argue, small, sharp disagreements that left wounds. He missed a dinner date, citing work, but the real reason was the paralyzing fear he couldn't articulate. She, feeling him pull away, poured all of her confusion and hurt into her dancing, pushing him further away. The safe harbor they had built was being battered by a storm of their own making. The easy laughter was gone, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. The touch that once felt like a promise now felt like a question. The breaking point came 3 days before Lila had to give her official answer to Paris. They stood in her apartment, the space that had once been their sanctuary now feeling like a battlefield. "I need to know, Ethan," she pleaded, tears streaking her face. "I need to know that if I go, we have a future. I can't give this up without knowing you're going to be there at the end of it." But Ethan, trapped in the prison of his own grief, could only see another impending, permanent loss. The words came out wrong, laced with the very fear he was trying to hide. "I can't ask you to stay, but I can't promise I'll just be waiting here, frozen in time. It's not that simple." Lila took a step back, her face a mask of pain. "So it is simple, then," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Your past is more important than our future." She didn't say the words "it's over," but they echoed in the space between them, louder than any shout. The next 2 days were the longest of Ethan's life. The silence in his apartment was no longer just the absence of his brother, it was the aching absence of Lila. He saw her everywhere, in the coffee shop where they'd had their first date, in the park where they'd walked, in the hollow emptiness of his own heart. He realized, with a clarity that was as painful as it was sudden, that he had been a coward. He was so afraid of losing her that he was pushing her away, guaranteeing the very loss he feared. He loved her. And love wasn't about holding on tightly out of fear, it was about having the courage to let the person you love fly, and having the faith to follow them, to build a new future, even if it was scary. The deadline for Lila's decision was 5 p.m. She was at the theater, not in rehearsal, but alone on the vast, empty stage. She sat in the center, hugging her knees, the formal acceptance letter and a pen lying beside her. She felt utterly lost. The dream of a lifetime was in her grasp, but it felt like ash because it meant letting go of the man she loved. How could she choose between the two halves of her soul? Then, she heard a single set of footsteps echoing in the silent hall. She looked up. It was Ethan. He was walking down the center aisle, the same path she had walked the night they met. His eyes were clear, his jaw set with a new determination. He didn't stop in the seats. He walked right up to the stage and climbed the steps, standing before her. He didn't hesitate. "You have to go to Paris," he said, his voice strong and sure, carrying across the empty space. Fresh tears welled in Lila's eyes. This was it. The final goodbye. "Ethan, He interrupted her, taking her hands and pulling her gently to her feet. "No, Lila, you didn't let me finish. You have to go. You have to dance on that stage. You have to become everything you were meant to be." He looked deep into her eyes, his own shining with a love so profound it took her breath away. "But I'm not asking you to choose between your dream and me. I'm refusing to let there be a choice. Your dream is my dream now. So let me come with you. Let's be scared together. Let's get lost in Paris together. Let's dance into our tomorrow, together." A sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped Lila's lips. She threw her arms around his neck, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, finally free from the chains of his past. Their future was an unwritten page, a new story waiting to be told in a new city, but they would write it together. Their kiss was not soft and tentative like the first, but a passionate, sealing promise, a vow of a love that was finally, unquestionably, stronger than fear. If you were moved by Ethan and Lila's journey, subscribe now. A world of unwritten romances awaits, and you won't want to miss a single one.